Brian Neubert here again from goldenblack.com, live at my cave at home. It is Thursday, May 7th, and this is your goldenblack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast for today. Once again, May 7th. It is brought to you by Fobbs Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. Once again, I want to remind you, if you're looking for a really good dinner or simply to support our local businesses, please keep in mind the 6th Street Dive in Lafayette, East End Grill in Lafayette, Arnie's in Lafayette, West Lafayette, and all over the state, Bruno's in West Lafayette, the Whitaker Inn in West Lafayette. All of them remain open for carryout orders. All of them would love to hear from you, and I'd like to remind you again not to call Purdue Federal Credit Union asking for food because they don't have any food. If you're new to the show, this is obviously our little daily Purdue conversation that hopefully is helping you occupy a little bit of surplus time, should you have any on your hands. Keep our readers and listeners and viewers and whatever engaged in all of this. If you're accessing this via YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to our page. Otherwise, here we go. Obviously, yesterday, if you haven't tuned us out yet, I would have tuned me out weeks ago probably. But to those of you who haven't yet tuned me out, thank you so much. I dearly, dearly appreciate it. Yesterday, we did a little breakdown of football expectations for Purdue's offense for whatever the 2020 season may look like. So what's the natural progression of things after we've done the offense? Obviously, we will discuss the defense here. So that's what I will do. Spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about Purdue football's anticipated defense. Obviously, to start off, the biggest story, the biggest theme, the biggest hot button, whatever term you want to use, regarding Purdue's defense in 2020 is going to be the transition to new coordinator Bob Diaco, a largely renovated defensive coaching staff, which will operate under, to some extent, a new system. We don't know exactly what Purdue is going to do defensively this season. That is precisely how Purdue likes it. But we do know that Purdue is implementing more 3-4 alignments to its defense. That has been one of Bob Diaco's MOs at the previous places he's been, from what we saw in the few opportunities we had during the spring, which obviously was cut short by all of this. We know that Purdue was implementing a 3-4 to some extent. Whether or not that's going to be Purdue's defense exclusively, whether it's going to be a quote-unquote wrinkle, we don't know. My guess is Purdue would like to have it in its arsenal and would probably, in a perfect world, would be able to run 11 guys on the field and have a situation where the defense may not necessarily know what alignment Purdue is going to be in on any given snap. That sort of multiplicity on defense can be really beneficial, but you obviously have to have personnel that fits that sort of thing, the versatility needed to pull it off. You have to do a really good job teaching, and your players have to do a really good job listening and being disciplined and carrying out their assignments. Those are themes that are consistent with whatever defense you want to run, but I think it's especially true when you're throwing a lot of different looks at people and you're expecting your players to be able to pull that off. But really the most important part is that your pieces fit, because when you're asking guys to wear a couple of different hats, they have to be able to do it, or helmets in this case. You're asking them to have to be able to do a lot of different things. The outside linebackers in a 3-4 have to be your pass rushers to a certain extent, but they also have to be able to cover a little bit. Sometimes this is simply, generally speaking, about a 3-4. I don't know what Purdue exactly has in mind for this stuff, but sometimes in a 3-4, your defensive ends are more about keeping the linebackers clean to allow them to make plays. Just some little differences between 3-4 and 4-3 typically, but Purdue, I'd imagine, will probably have a little bit of both in its playbook. And as I said before, the ideal scenario is probably for them to be able to do one or the other whenever they see fit. What you're seeing in recruiting is you're seeing Purdue clearly trying to move its personnel in a direction where it can do everything I just discussed. The term versatility seems to be coming up with every defensive recruit Purdue is recruiting, whether it's defensive linemen being able to play nose, play on the outside, play kind of that true defensive end position, whether it's the outside linebackers being able to play with their hand in the dirt as kind of a 4-3 defensive end or as a 3-4 outside linebacker, defensive backs being able to play a lot of different roles in the secondary. Just seems like versatility these days is the hot button topic for Purdue in recruiting on the defensive side of the ball. Purdue obviously has some pretty solid pieces coming back from a defensive perspective to fit this system. I think the most important thing for Purdue here is to make sure that whatever system Purdue runs is compatible or vice versa with the personnel returning. And the guy, to me, who kind of puts a face on that is Derek Barnes a little bit. I thought Derek Barnes had a very good season last year as a pass rusher in his first year, really as kind of a true defensive end sort of player. Now it looks like in this 3-4, he is going to move to a middle linebacker position. He moved out of a linebacker position after his sophomore year because it seemed like Purdue needed some pass rushing punch. Maybe he was a little bit of a better fit not playing in space. Now he will be, when he's part of these 3-4 alignments, he will be standing up again, albeit in the middle, maybe not as out in space as he was before. But that's the sort of thing where you have to make sure that you are maximizing the value of the assets you have in place now. And that will be the balance Purdue has to strike here between being new and innovative, but also maximizing the resources at its disposal currently. But Purdue does have a lot of good pieces in place from a defensive perspective with which to, in the best case scenario, improve defensively. That's obviously the goal. If Purdue didn't want to improve defensively, they wouldn't have made wholesale changes on that side of the ball. I think this can be one of the better defensive lines Purdue has had in recent years. I think that a foursome in a 4-3 of George Karlaftis, Lorenzo Neal, Anthony Watts, and Derek Barnes would have been a really, really good, really, really experienced four-man defensive line. When you go to the 3-4 and you take somebody off the field, my presumption is that will be Watts, assuming Lorenzo Neal can carry a full load of playing time. But Purdue does have a lot of good, solid defensive linemen and a lot of experience. You're talking about those four guys I just listed. Three of them are seniors. I think three of them are fifth-year seniors, as a matter of fact. But obviously George Karlaftis is a star in the making, if not a star already. He is your best defensive player, and I think obviously any defense, you want your stars to be able to be stars. And I think getting him in as many positions to make plays, to get after the quarterback, to get after whoever, I think is obviously something Purdue has a tremendous luxury in having him. That was a really, really bad sentence. I think the defensive line can be really, really solid. I think Purdue has its best, most experienced pair of defensive tackles, arguably since Kawan Short and Michael Neal, in Lorenzo Neal and Anthony Watts. I might be forgetting somebody, whoever it might be. I obviously I can't remember, but I think that's the last really good twosome of defensive tackles I can think of at Purdue. And I think Lorenzo Neal, provided he's healthy, provided he's well conditioned, provided all of his past difficulties with his injuries are behind him, and Anthony Watts can be a really solid duo. And when you're good in the middle on defense, you have a pretty good chance to be good, period. I think that, Purdue has to figure some things out at linebacker. I think, as you go from a 4-3 to a 3-4, presumably the roles kind of change a little bit. Derek Barnes is going to be asked to do something a little bit differently. DeMarcus Mitchell, the junior college player, basically has to pan out because you don't have a lot of linebackers. And when you run a 3-4, the linebackers are critical. They are the crux of the defense historically. What Purdue might be doing differently from a general 3-4, I do not know, but there's really no way around needing your linebackers to be good in a 3-4 because there's a lot of them out there. They're going to be in positions to make plays, and they have to be good. DeMarcus Mitchell comes to Purdue from junior college. They always say, whoever they may be, that sometimes it takes a year for a junior college player in a new program to be as good as he can be. There will be a learning curve there, but they recruited DeMarcus Mitchell to come in and play right away to be an impact player, and Purdue is going to be counting on it, and they need him to pan out. They need him to be a good player. They need him to be a productive player. I mentioned Derek Barnes already. I think second-year improvement is going to be a really, really important theme for Purdue this season on defense, because you had a lot of first-year players out there last year who did some really positive things, but you want those guys to go from surviving as young players to thriving as older players. George Karlaftis is exempt from this conversation because he was kind of a prodigy from day one. He is a star. He is established. He's good. You'd love for him to get better, but he is good as is, even if he doesn't. The guys I'm talking about here are specifically Jalen Graham, who started out as a safety. Now it seems to be transitioning into more of a linebacker sort of role. Cam Allen, who I think can be a really good player at safety. Corey Trice, who did some really, really good things as a redshirt freshman. Cornerback in his first year playing cornerback. Branson Dean, the defensive lineman who played sparingly last season as a redshirt freshman, who now might be thrust into a pretty prominent role as one of Purdue's defensive ends. And then just in general, all of the young defensive linemen who played too early in their career last year because of the injury to Lorenzo Neal, because of the injury at one point to Anthony Watts, just because of the injuries in general. I'm talking about Lawrence Johnson for one. I'm talking about Jack Sullivan for another. Those guys had to play really early in their careers. Presumably, they will get better because of experience. The atypical nature of this offseason will not be something that's not felt. I feel like all of those second-year guys needed to have a really good offseason in the weight room and whatnot. Confidence comes from that on top of the natural improvements physically, strength and conditioning-wise. That is a problem everyone in the country is dealing with right now, obviously, but I think some teams maybe more than others. I think those young linemen on both sides of the ball from Purdue really needed to have a good, productive offseason in the weight room. May not get that opportunity, but guys like Branson Dean, Lawrence Johnson, Jack Sullivan, I think are guys with a little bit of experience who Purdue would really like to see take a jump from one level to another, because this isn't just about this year too. That's the future of your defensive line as well. You would like to see those guys keep on a trajectory to where they can be pretty good, not just now, but when they're juniors next year and Derek Barnes, Lorenzo Neal, Anthony Watts are gone, and you need those guys to kind of be your a big part of your defensive front. I think the improvement of those guys is critical. I think the instant impact potential newcomers are obviously really, really important to this too. I mentioned DeMarcus Mitchell before. I think you have no choice but for him to at least be a solid player, if not a good player, right away. Tyler Coyle, the fifth-year safety they brought in as a grad transfer from Connecticut. I think safety has forever been a position where Purdue has needed a physical upgrade, has needed a talent upgrade. Jalen Graham seems to be phasing out of that position. Marvin Grant's coming back from a shoulder surgery. So the two players you looked at in last year's signing class as kind of the future of your safety position, perhaps might not necessarily be those guys right now. But Tyler Coyle, if he can bring a veteran presence back there, and Cam Allen, can build on a really good true freshman season, I think Purdue has some of its best athletes back there, some proven guys, or guys who can quickly become proven guys because they're both talented. Brennan Thienemann's always back there too. Simmons Smiley's back there as well. Two very experienced players. Experience always seems to rise to the top at certain positions, safety being one of them. So don't write off Brennan Thienemann. Don't write off Simeon Smiley either. Even though Tyler Coyle and Cam Allen seem like, guys who should be in line to be pretty prominent contributors. So that's from a personnel perspective. That's kind of what I got on the defense. I don't know. Purdue needs to be good on offense. I mean, that is what Purdue is going to be when it's good in the future. Purdue has a lot of offensive weapons. Purdue is an offensive program at heart. Purdue is a vertical passing program at heart. Purdue's aim is to win with offense. I think that if they can build a good complementary defense, one that gives opponents just enough problems, to be salty, then I think that's a win. But the two things that really come to mind for me from a defensive perspective is, I've mentioned this in a prior video, Purdue has to be good on third and long. Purdue has to get off the field when it has opportunities to get off the field. That was a problem last year. They have to be better against the pass. That's been one of Purdue's issues for quite some time. But also turnovers. I think that's obvious. I mean, every defense in college football wants turnovers, but I think if you ideally get to a place where you are scoring at the level you want to be scoring from an offensive perspective, you don't necessarily have to win with defense, but if you can just get enough turnovers that the offense can cash in on, then all of a sudden you've put yourself ahead of the curve, even if you get in a shootout. That is kind of the model Purdue won with back in the late 90s. I know that was a long, long time ago, but Purdue had a very explosive offense and understood that it couldn't really build a Michigan-Ohio State defense right away. So what it did was it emphasized speed, it emphasized big plays, it turned its defensive ends loose, got a lot of sacks, got a lot of negative plays, generated a lot of turnovers, and the balance between offense and defense was kind of a perfect relationship. And I think if Purdue can just get to a place where it can force mistakes and then capitalize on offense, I think that's that can be kind of a sustainable model for Purdue. But Purdue obviously wants to get much better on defense than it has been. That has been a years-long endeavor for Purdue, which has obviously had some challenges being particularly good on defense over the span of many coaching staffs now. So this is not just a modern issue. This is a almost generational issue. So the goal now is to improve from a defensive perspective. The job is in Bob Diaco's lap right now as Purdue's new coordinator, and we shall see how things go. So that is what I've got about Purdue's defense. I hope you found value in this. I hope you haven't tuned me out, as I said before. I know these can get boring. I know these can get academic. I know I'm an insufferable blowhard, but I certainly appreciate everybody watching and reading. And once again, this has been your goldenblack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast for Thursday, May 7th. It has been brought to you by Foss Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. Keep in mind, please, once again, if you're looking for a great dinner, if you're looking to support our local businesses, 6th Street Dive, East End Grill, Arnie's, Bruno's, the Whitaker Inn. All of them are open for carrot orders. All of them would love to hear from you, and you will not be sorry if they do in fact hear from you. So thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your Thursday, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.